Hey folks, tonight we're stepping into the loud, smoky, and unapologetically sticky world of the medieval tavern. The beating, booze-soaked heart of every village. Not just the town's gathering place, but its rumor mill, comedy club, and occasional crime scene. It was the one place where a knight, a farmer, and a bard could sit side by side, get equally drunk, and walk out equally broke, assuming they walked out at all. This wasn't merely a drinking hole. It was chaos in a thatched roof bottle. A heady mix of danger, crude humor, and whatever sickness was doing the rounds. So, before you sink into your chair, take a second to hit like and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy this kind of historical mayhem. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it in your corner of the world? Now, lower the lights, maybe switch on a fan to get that gentle hum going in the background. Let's slip back together into the grime of the past. Picture yourself wading through muddy streets that reek of horse droppings, chimney soot, and a broth of questionable origins. Of course, it's raining, or just finished raining. Either way, the ground is slick, your feet are soaked, and your only shoes feel like wet sponges. You're hungry, cold, and someone in a wagon load of root vegetables nearly flattened you. You need a drink, but in a medieval town, how do you even find the tavern? There's no neon sign to guide you, no star rating system, and definitely no GPS to save you. What you do have, however, is sound. Just follow the ruckus. Somewhere beyond the hammering of the blacksmith and the fish vendor screeching about his freshest eels, there's a melody of shouting, laughter, and someone belting out an angry ballad about a goose. And then you see it, a warped wooden building sagging as though the building itself is drunk. Over the doorway, a cracked wooden sign swings lazily. It could be a picture of a barrel or a bear, or possibly both in a brawl. Doesn't matter. You've arrived. Welcome to the tavern. The entrance step is sticky with beer, and as you shove the heavy, iron-hinged door open, it groans loud enough to deserve applause. A blast of warm, smoky air hits you in the face. A swirling mix of wet wool, spilled ale, and something that might once have been meat. You've officially entered. The ceiling's low enough to threaten tall men with concussions, and the floor isn't just dirty. It is dirt. Straw has been scattered over it in a half-hearted attempt to create the illusion of cleanliness. Fails miserably. Don't look too closely. Forget about booths or menus. There's no such thing as a quiet table for two here. This place only operates in two modes: loud or closed due to something catching fire. You spot an empty place on a crooked bench by the hearth. It's damp with something you don't want to identify. A man is loudly accusing someone of chicken theft. Another guy is unconscious, clutching a ladle like it's his last possession. Beneath one of the tables, a scruffy one-eyed dog chews on a bone like he owns the joint. And friend, that's just your welcome. You've only stepped through the door, and already it smells like a night you'll regret or never remember. As the door slams shut behind you, a heavy darkness settles around your shoulders like a moist, scratchy cloak. Warm, itchy, and slightly suspect. Your eyes begin to adjust. Candle flames flutter across smoke-stained walls, casting jittery shadows that make even the stools look threatening. A fire crackles in the far corner, equal parts heater and fire risk. Smoke curls lazily in the air, half-heartedly attempting to escape through a chimney that may or may not be home to a dead bird. But the thing that really grabs your senses, the smell. It's not a scent, it's a spiritual trial. Ale dominates the air, warm, sharp, and generously spilled. But layered beneath that is sweat. Years of it. Human, horse, and possibly something otherworldly. Add in the sour tang of moldy crusts, the dampness of decomposing straw, and the ghost of something that might have once been boiled onions, and you've got a scent so potent, no perfumer has ever dared replicate it. The tables, if you can call them that, are scarred veterans of countless evenings. Covered in rough carvings, knife marks, and juvenile drawings, they stand crooked and defiant, wobbling like they've been through wars, and maybe they have. Benches groan under the burden of soaked cloaks, muddy footwear, and the collective weight of poor choices. The floor, still very much just earth, wears a patchy skin of straw meant to absorb spilled drinks, spit, and unconscious locals, with varying success. You tread lightly. One misstep and your boot lands in something that defies explanation and common decency. The tavern's crowd pulses like one loud, unpredictable creature. In one corner, laughter erupts like a cannon blast. In another, two men are locked in a fiery debate about the going price of a pig, possibly the one tied up near the door. A woman slams her mug so violently that half the drink arcs into the air. Nobody reacts. This is just Tuesday. A man nearby stares blankly in your direction. Not out of interest, but because his brain seems caught between a profound thought and the realization he's forgotten how sitting works. Someone sneezes behind you. The entire left side of the tavern tilts away instinctively, like a school of fish avoiding danger. And yet, despite the sensory onslaught, the smells, the noise, the visual confusion, something about this place pulls you in. There's a strange, gruff warmth to it. This tavern is alive, loud, unwashed, unpolished, but beating with the energy of shared stories and spilled ale. A medieval version of social media minus the filters and plus a lot more screaming. You spot your place. It's soggy. It's probably cursed. But it's yours for now. At a glance, the layout of the tavern looks like someone lost a bet with gravity. Furniture is scattered like debris after a storm, some of it clearly improvisational. A barrel here, a crate there. No plan, no sections, no logic. Just organized chaos. There's no bar in the traditional sense. Just a thick slab of wood balanced on two barrels, bowed slightly in the middle under the weight of mugs, pitchers, and the elbows of the disinterested. Behind it stands the tavern keeper, a multitasking maestro of controlled chaos. One hand pours, one points threateningly, and the eyes? They're fixed on that guy who still owes money from last week. Menus? Please. You ask what's available, and if you're lucky, you'll get the choice of ale or silence. Maybe both. The drinks are either room temperature or alive. Possibly both. In one shadowed corner, a narrow staircase rises or leans toward a second floor. Sold, warped, and looks like it bites. You can just make out a boot dangling from a post halfway up. Is it a warning? A prank? Decoration? No one dares to find out. Some taverns feature a mysterious back room. Sometimes it's for storing barrels. Other times it's a gambling den or something less wholesome. Could also be the last known location of a traveler who made a clever remark about the barmaid's teeth. Local wisdom says, don't ask, don't look, don't end up there. The walls are tattooed with soot trails from candles long burned out. The windows, if you can call them that, are covered in cloudy cloth or stretched animal hide, doing their best impression of privacy. The whole place feels like it's stitched together with alcohol and secrets. Every surface in this place gleams, not from care, but from centuries of elbows, muddy boots, spilled brews, and possibly a disoriented chicken. And yet, through the mess, or perhaps because of it, the whole thing runs with uncanny rhythm. People know instinctively where to plop down, when to yell, when to laugh, and when to dodge a flying mug. It's not structure, it's survival choreography. At the center of every medieval tavern reigns a sovereign. Not some noble with a title or a collector of taxes. No, the true power here is the tavern keeper. No crown, no throne, but make no mistake. This is their kingdom. A one-person command center. They cook, serve, calculate, mediate, and enforce order, all without missing a beat. You don't ask if they're in charge. You feel it. If the tavern keeper is a man, he's probably as wide as he is tall, with hands like old tree stumps and a face that looks like it's been marinated in smoke and sarcasm. If it's a woman, and quite often it is, she's got eyes sharper than a thief's dagger and a stare that can turn rowdy warriors into obedient lambs. Both varieties have scrubbed blood from straw before breakfast and served stew through fistfights. They welcome the regulars with a grunt, eye newcomers with measured distrust, and silence belligerents with either a glare or a pewter mug to the forehead. They track debts in their head, know who's on their last warning, and who still hasn't paid for their Tuesday blackout. And they do it without a scrap of paper. Medieval literacy might be rare, but tavern memory? That's legend. Their mood dictates the night's atmosphere. If they're cheerful, the whole room buzzes with cheer. If they're sour, the air tightens and even jokes sound like prayers. They referee arguments, settle cheating accusations, and are the first to reach for a club when voices turn into fists. Rule 1. Do not test the tavern keeper. They're also the town's unofficial database. They know whose debt is mounting, who's meeting someone else's wife after dark, and who's going by a fake name because they left their last village in a hurry. Want info? Offer coin. Want protection? Sit nearby. Want leniency? Better not have broken anything last time you were here. Some keepers have help. A sullen teen, a stern spouse, or an orphan they sort of inherited and now use to haul full barrels up narrow stairs. These helpers scurry between legs, balancing mugs, mopping puddles, and dodging inebriated knights, all while trying not to lose a limb. So, while the tavern may seem like chaos incarnate, it's actually a well-balanced storm. And at its calm, commanding eye, stands the tavern keeper, god of ale, shepherd of drunks, and the only thing standing between you and a full-blown brawl. Eventually, you claim a shaky seat on a warped bench, dodging an elbow and someone's flying spoonful of stew. Your throat is parched, your feet are soaked, and it's time for the main attraction, the drink. But if you're expecting elegance, you're in the wrong century. No sommelier, no wine glass, and certainly no fruit garnish. This is survival hydration. Let's begin with ale, the undisputed king. Unfiltered, unrefined, and likely brewed 3 feet from where the dog sleeps. It's thick, the color of pond water, and generously seasoned with surprises. Bits of grain, drifting yeast, and possibly a trace of someone else's mustache. It's never cold. There's no such thing as refrigeration, and you never ask how long it's been sitting there. You grip the mug, take a breath, and hope for the best. Then comes mead, honey wine. Sounds refined, doesn't it? In truth, it's syrupy, strong, and known to explode if the brewing went wrong. If the tavern keeper made it themselves, it could be heavenly, or it could taste like fermented nightmares and be stings. Reserved for wedding toasts, special guests, or the bard who won't shut up unless bribed with sweet alcohol. Then there's cider, made from apples, fresh maybe, or maybe they rolled under a cart 3 weeks ago and someone said, "Close enough." It's tart, mildly fizzy, and served in chipped mugs that do double duty as breakfast bowls. It's the go-to drink in orchard-heavy regions or for those trying to block out the stench of their neighbor's armpit. Wine? Sure, technically. Unless you're seated in a noble hall or happen to be traveling through the south of Europe, your wine will likely arrive diluted, vinegary, and served with a hearty dose of passive-aggressive humor. The good stuff is strictly reserved for aristocrats, bishops, and that merchant who just tripled his fortune selling overpriced salt to a desperate town. As for water, well, that's a gamble, a risky one, because unless it's been boiled, which wastes precious firewood, it's probably hosting an invisible army of microscopic doom. Clean wells are few, and running water is a myth, so even children sip ale from a young age. Not because it's fun, but because they'd prefer not to die of dysentery before learning how to count. Nobody's measuring pours or fussing over cocktail garnishes in this place. Drinks come in crude mugs of clay, wood, or tin, and some of them still carry a trace of last night's soup. You lift your vessel, give it a suspicious sniff, and take a cautious sip. It's warm, bitter, and strangely perfect, because in a medieval tavern, if it's liquid and doesn't immediately kill you, it's considered premium. So, you've survived the ale? Barely. But now your stomach roars in protest. A growl fueled by hunger, fatigue, and the memory of your last meal, which was mostly boiled sadness and barley. Time to eat. But before you get excited, no, there's no menu. No one's coming over to ask about your allergies or preferred spice level. Dining here is a humble affair. You don't order food, you ask what hasn't been scraped from the bottom of the pot yet, and hope it's still warm and only moderately alarming. The centerpiece of most meals is pottage, a chunky, ever-evolving stew made from whatever grains, greens, and questionable bits of animal happen to be available that day. It's been simmering over the fire since early in the week, and now it's Thursday. Ingredients go in, nothing comes out. More archaeological layer than meal, really. If there's meat involved, consider yourself blessed. Could be rabbit, could be pigeon, could be the tavern's former mascot that got too close to the coals. If it's game, it might be tender and tasty, or leathery and haunted by the taste of desperation. Your bowl is either wood or rough clay. Your spoon might be your own, or your fingers, if the spoon went missing in last night's scuffle. Most diners carry their own knife because in this world, tableware is a personal responsibility. Napkins? Dream on. You've got sleeves. Or, if you're lucky, a communal rag that's seen more horrors than the average battlefield. Bread is often available, and by bread we mean something between a food and a blunt instrument. If it's soft, it was baked this morning. If it's hard, it was probably used as a doorstop earlier this week. It's typically served alongside cheese that smells like sorrow and has started forming opinions of its own. Salted fish? Occasionally. Pickled eggs? If you're lucky. And sometimes, if fortune favors your side of the table, the tavern offers a special, which is just a clever way of saying, we have a lot of this and it needs to go. Flavor is optional. Texture is a surprise. But under the golden shimmer of firelight, surrounded by the scent of warm food and the buzz of life, it's not bad. It fills the stomach. It warms the bones. And if you avoid staring too long at what's bobbing in your bowl, it might even feel comforting. Because you're not here to dine. You're here to survive the evening with a full belly and a story to tell. Once seated, ideally on a bench that doesn't have a dagger wedged into it, you begin to notice the true attraction of the tavern. The people. This is medieval Facebook, only louder, drunker, and entirely filter-free. A symphony of oversharing, shouting, and selective memory. To your left, a flushed-faced farmer is already working through his fourth mug, retelling the saga of his cow's miraculous sideways birth for the 10th time. He slaps your back mid-sentence, either because he likes you or because you remind him of his drinking buddy, who may or may not have been a goat. Across the room, in the shadows, sits a hooded figure nursing a drink like it owes him money. Monk on the run, wanted criminal, guy with a terrible hangover? You won't know. And unless you want to wake up behind the stables with missing shoes, you won't ask. Near the hearth, a battle-worn soldier is recounting war stories to a captivated crowd. His armor is more rust than metal, but his voice carries the kind of bravado only ale and trauma can produce. His tale includes dragons, drunken Frenchmen, and a sword that apparently gave relationship advice. Total nonsense, obviously, and no one cares. His mug stays full, his audience stays amused, and that's all that matters. At another table, a merchant, flushed, loud, and glistening, bellows grain prices no one asked to hear. He jingles gold coins like a man daring someone to mug him before closing time. Nearby, two locals are deep into a game of dice. The table wobbles, and so do their ethics. One is clearly cheating. The other is clearly aware, but lets it slide. He's probably waiting until the last gulp of ale to throw his punch. In the corner, a bard plucks uncertainly at a lute, his voice cracking over what might be a love song, or just a heartfelt improvisation about whatever he saw on the way in. No one minds. He's clothed. He's in key. That's already an upgrade from last night's disaster. Women weave through the crowd. Some pour drinks, others work more private arrangements. All of them are sharp, quick, and not to be trifled with. They can flirt with charm, laugh with fire, or flatten a man's pride, and jaw if he gets mouthy. Children flit between legs like shadows, snagging crusts of bread or dropped coins with the casual grace of seasoned pickpockets. No one stops them. They're part of the system now, the tavern's youngest, quietest shareholders. Everyone is watching everyone else, drinking, scheming, pretending not to notice the man passed out beneath the table, snoring into a half-eaten turnip. This place isn't just where people eat and drink. It's a living, wheezing, rumbling stage. And tonight, you're in the middle of the play. No script, no cues, just pure, unscripted, medieval madness. Forget songs and lutes for a moment. The real soundtrack here is chaos. It starts with the clatter of mugs, some raised in cheers, others slammed in argument, and a few hurled in confusion. Some hit the table, others hit the floor. Both earn applause. Then there's laughter, loud, infectious, and entirely inexplicable. A farmer wheezes over his own hay pun. A knight laughs until he hiccups at the word pottage. A monk loses his breath every time someone says, "Duck." No one knows why. No one asks. Layer by layer, voices rise, overlapping and escalating like a barnyard full of roosters with something to prove. Arguments erupt over taxes and rumors. Tales of love, battle, and chicken theft crash into one another. Someone quotes scripture wrong to win a bet. Behind the bar, the keeper roars over the noise while swatting a fly with a ladle. A barmaid screeches at a wandering hand. Someone chants another round, like it's a sacred ritual. In the far corner, the bard, now down to 3 strings and even fewer rhymes, plays his reliable 4-chord medley. Verses wander between tales of heartbreak, misplaced livestock, and noblemen who dressed in the dark. No one listens until he names someone in the room. Then the mood shifts. Sometimes it turns festive. Sometimes it turns violent. Either way, it gets interesting. Someone knocks over a drink. Someone else belches with such force it rattles a candle. Another stumbles off a bench, lands on the floor, and continues his story from the dirt like it was part of the plan. Dogs bark intermittently. A goat bleats in protest. No one seems surprised there's a goat. Chairs scrape across packed earth like thunder inside a wooden cavern. There's no peace, but there is rhythm, the rhythm of barely contained chaos. And then, for no reason at all, silence. Just for a breath, a suspended moment, 3 seconds of eerie stillness. And then, as if on cue, someone rips a mighty fart that echoes off the rafters, and the room explodes in noise again. This isn't background ambience. This is the tavern's pulse. Rough, loud, and unmistakably alive. If you listen long enough, it starts to feel like music. A wild kind of harmony born from pure disorder. And like everything else in this place, it only grows louder the longer you stay. The more ale flows, the more stew settles, the more the room morphs into something primal. A place where stories are made and sense is optional. At some point, the tavern stops pretending to be a place for meals and becomes something closer to a medieval casino, minus the chandeliers plus a lot more shouting. Gambling takes center stage, and everyone's in. From grizzled warriors missing teeth to barefoot kids tossing borrowed dice with wild optimism. There's no official dealer, no rules on a wall, just a dented table, a few copper coins, and a shared understanding that someone's about to lose their dignity. Dice dominate. They're made from bone, wood, or whatever the carver found lying near a fire. They tumble across scarred tables like storm clouds rolling through. Each throw unleashes a mix of joy, despair, and someone hissing sorcery under their breath. No one trusts the dice. Everyone uses them anyway. Cards appear too, especially in towns where things pretend to be refined. Thick, hand-painted, with corners frayed and the occasional card mysteriously missing. Rules are fluid, dependent entirely on the most convincing liar at the table. Sometimes it's about highest value. Sometimes it's matching animals. Occasionally, it devolves into something closer to interpretive dance. The stakes? Anything. Coins, ale, goats. One man wagers his boots. Another offers his dignity. One particularly drunk fool bets a night of his own freedom and loses. He's currently mopping up spilled stew with someone else's shirt. The regulars are slick. They roll slow, watch close, and smile wide. Cheating isn't the exception. It's the sport within the sport. Hidden dice slide into sleeves. Cards reappear too often. Someone coughs conspicuously just as luck changes hands. The whole thing is a theater of deceit, and the audience is complicit. Win big and you're expected to buy a round, or risk being relieved of your winnings the old-fashioned way. Lose too hard, and you nod, chuckle, and slowly edge your way toward the exit with what's left of your pride and shoelaces. And it's not just dice and cards. Side challenges pop up constantly. Arm wrestling, thumb duels. Who can chug the most ale without falling off their stool? The winner earns applause. The loser earns a bruised ego, a muddy nap under the table, and a headache that lingers until next Tuesday. But even if the games are unfair, the rules unclear, and the stakes ridiculous, the energy is magnetic. Because here, luck isn't a pastime. It's a high-stakes dance with your money, your reputation, and sometimes your trousers. As the night wears on, the tavern takes on a different heat. Not just from the hearth, but from the crowd itself. The air thickens with smoke, sweat, and a new kind of performance. One made not of instruments, but words. It's story time, the medieval kind. In the corner, the bard shifts, adjusts his half-tuned lute, and clears his throat like a rooster stretching for battle. His teeth are missing. His ego is not. With theatrical flair, he strums and launches into an epic about love, war, and watery doom. A knight who fell for a mermaid and drowned reciting couplets. Utter nonsense, utterly captivating. No one believes him, everyone listens, because in this world, truth is optional. Entertainment is not. The stories spread like spilled ale. Everyone joins in, not trained minstrels, just half-drunk locals with a voice and a wild memory. One man boasts about wrestling a bear in his underpants. Another swears he watched a witch morph a cow into a goat. A third claims noble blood through a cousin's cousin who once looked at Charlemagne's horse. Every story begins with, "You won't believe this." And they're right. We don't. But we want to. Tall tales morph into songs. Misadventures become ballads. Someone delivers a joke so abysmal it stumbles into brilliance. Someone else recites a poem that's definitely stolen from a monastery. The audience claps, boos, or hurls crusty bread, depending on the hour, the rhyme, and the charisma. And if luck is with you, the real pros arrive. Scolds, jesters, or traveling minstrels. Performers who wander from village to village, trading tunes for a few coins, a hot meal, or just a night without rain. When they enter, the air shifts, the crowd hushes, because even in the loudest tavern, real art demands a beat of silence. Their songs are polished from repetition, their tales long-winded and exaggerated, and their ability to whip a crowd into chaos downright dangerous. But even these seasoned storytellers obey the golden rule of the tavern. Never let truth get in the way of a good tale. In this smoky, firelit room where ale sloshes and laughter ricochets off the rafters, storytelling isn't just amusement. It's ritual. It's how strangers become drinking buddies, how legends are born, and how someone you insulted 5 minutes ago might buy your next round. By midnight, half the tavern is acting out the saga of the one-legged knight who defeated 6 thieves armed with only a ladle and a bad attitude. You laugh, you cheer, you suspend disbelief entirely, because here, every good liar is one punchline away from sainthood. As the fire burns low and the alcohol burns hot, a new energy creeps into the room, warm, bold, and dripping with poorly chosen words. The bard has launched into his 3rd song about wandering shepherdesses and broken promises. And suddenly, love is in the air, or something that passes for it in medieval lighting. Welcome to the art of medieval flirting. Spoiler, it's not subtle. It might start with intense eye contact or one eye focused as best it can through a mead-smeared blur. A man with 2 teeth left and a face like weathered leather leans across a splintered bench and slurs. "Milady, your beauty scorches brighter than the hearth." Her reply is a crust of bread to the face. The crowd roars approval. Others take softer approaches. A shy refill of a mug. A compliment delivered with so much slurring it becomes a riddle. An offer to carry a bowl of stew with gentlemanly care, which, inevitably, still ends up on someone's lap. If you're a woman in this tavern, whether staff, merchant, or just passing through, you've likely become an expert in dodging at least 3 half-baked serenades, 2 wrestling challenges, and 1 man who tries to balance a knife on his nose as a display of mating potential. Occasionally, one of these gestures works. More often, they end in a bruised ego or a purse that suddenly feels lighter. But for those genuinely seeking something more than drunken poetry, the tavern offers its own kind of marketplace. Courtesans glide through the room with practiced grace, reading faces like books. They know who has coin, who has charm, and who won't make it up the stairs. Deals are struck with quiet nods, but the consequences are loud and occasionally airborne. And of course, jealousy brews like the ale. Nothing heats a room faster than a wandering glance or a laugh that lasts 1 second too long. One moment it's flirting. The next, a mug flies. Someone flips a bench. Someone else uses a spoon as a weapon. Furniture groans in protest. And yet again, the same bench snaps in half for the 3rd time this week. And still, somehow, real sparks manage to flicker. A baker's daughter and a stonemason lock eyes over a shared bowl. 2 slurring farmers bond over their deep, unspoken hatred of turnips. A monk flirts with a nun and immediately regrets it. Love, or its fermented cousin, survives even in the loudest corners of the tavern. Because here, romance is an unpredictable mix of courage, timing, and staying upright through the sentence. You have the most beautiful face plants into stew. You might find a soulmate. You might earn a slap. Either way, you'll remember it. Or someone will remind you of it while pointing and laughing tomorrow. And then, inevitably, it happens. Maybe it's a spilled drink. Maybe someone accused someone else of cheating at dice. Or maybe 2 men laid claim to the same bench and neither blinked. Or perhaps someone dared insult another man's mother, comparing her to either a goat or a soup, the details lost to slurring. Suddenly, the tavern turns. Where there were songs and stories, now there's shouting and motion. A stool goes airborne. A mug crashes to the floor. Someone bellows, "Hold my bread," before launching themselves across a bench with all the grace of a trebuchet fired at random. No one is shocked. No one even pauses mid-drink. Tavern brawls aren't rare. They're practically included in the experience, somewhere between the stew and the toothache. And while it sounds dangerous, it's often more ridiculous than brutal. Fists fly, but mostly miss. Someone slips on stew. Someone else gets tackled into a barrel. Hair is tugged. Beards are pulled. Shirts are shredded. The tavern keeper rises like a warlord, shouting orders over the din. One hand gripping a ladle, the other a club worn smooth from nights like this. Every so often, someone joins the fray with absolutely no idea what started it. They see movement, hear shouting, and leap in like it's a team sport. Around them, spectators place impromptu bets, scoot their mugs out of splash range, or cheer like it's festival day. Weapons? Rarely. Most folks have the common sense to keep things fist-based, because pulling a blade can escalate things from amusing brawl to permanent tavern legend. And no one wants to get barred from the only place in town that serves hot food and not totally lethal cider. Eventually, someone hits the floor and decides to stay there. Someone else walks into a post and quietly accepts it as their new home. The brawl burns out like a sputtering candle, abrupt, unceremonious, and oddly satisfying. And here's the beautiful twist. Once it ends, it ends. No vendettas, no court summons, just a few sore ribs, some laughter, and maybe a brand new nickname like One-Eyed Arnold or Benchbreaker Bill. In a medieval tavern, a good fight is just part of the night's rhythm. Chaotic, sloppy, but weirdly communal. As long as no one leaves in a cart, it's considered a success. So the chaos winds down. The bard's passed out mid-rhyme. Your belly sloshes with mystery stew and cider of questionable freshness. It's time to sleep, or at least pretend to. But don't get any ideas about comfort. There's no down feather bedding or lavender-scented sheets here. You're not in a manor. You're upstairs in a crooked tavern. If the establishment offers lodging at all, it's likely up a warped staircase that groans with every step and tries to steal your boot heel. Upstairs, you'll find tilted floors, beams at head-smashing height, and rooms that redefine the word shared. Personal space is fiction. You'll be tucked shoulder to shoulder with strangers. Some wheezing, some snoring in Latin, and one who mutters about sheep taxes in his dreams. Beds, if they can be called that, are sacks of straw on wooden frames. Lumpy, itchy, possibly alive. You don't undress. You don't unwind. You lie down fully clothed, boots on, dagger under pillow. Not for coziness, but for survival. Blankets are shared. So are smells. If someone ate garlic, and someone always ate garlic, it becomes part of your sleep experience. The scent soaks into your dreams like a prophecy you didn't ask for. If you can't afford a room, or drank your way out of caring, you crash downstairs. On a bench, under a table, curled by the hearth next to a dog whose name is unknown and whose ownership is questionable. You'll be stepped on, sneezed on, maybe used as a makeshift footrest. And yet, sleep comes. Somehow. Because the tavern doesn't fall silent. It just settles. The final mug empties. The final slurred tale fades. But always there's something. The snap of a log, a muttered dream, or the soft, echoing trumpet of someone losing a battle with digestion overhead. It's not comfortable, it's not clean, but it feels safe in a strange, earthy way. The fire holds off the worst of the cold. The tavern keeper stays half awake with a club in one hand and suspicion in the other. And the leftover noise, human, flawed, warm, becomes its own lullaby. You'll wake sore, dry-mouthed, possibly missing a sock. But for a few short hours, you slept among travelers, peasants, liars, and legends. No royalty, no silence, just straw, snoring, and the faint prayer that your boots are still beneath your bench. Dawn doesn't rise. It sneaks in, a pale, rude light slipping between warped shutters and poking you right in the face. The tavern feels different now. Not quiet, but subdued. As if the building, too, has a hangover. You open one eye. Someone's muddy boot is planted on your chest. Another figure nearby mumbles something about livestock tariffs. The bard is snoring under a bench, holding his lute like it might turn into breakfast. A chicken hops past, pecking yesterday's crusts with noble focus. No one asks where it came from. It simply is. The fire's down to ashes. The air is cold, and the smoke hangs low. But somehow, it still feels like a place where you belong, even if just for the night. A few patrons begin to stir, groaning like wounded knights, though their battle scars were earned in ale, not war. One man sits upright, surveys the wreckage around him, then lies back down with the quiet resignation of a man who's decided today just isn't worth it. The tavern keeper, naturally, is already moving. They're always moving, clattering mugs, sweeping yesterday's straw into today's piles, and reheating something in a pot that smells equal parts inviting and vaguely threatening. They glance at the bodies scattered across the floor like fallen soldiers, then clang a ladle against a metal mug with the force of a church bell from hell. That's your wake-up call. Up or out. There's no morning spread. No eggs, no honey cakes. If fortune favors you, there's still pottage. Thicker now, as if time itself has become an ingredient. The bread is warmish. The ale is thinner. No one complains. Complaining takes energy. Some drag themselves outside and dunk their heads into a barrel of rainwater, declaring themselves cleansed. You check your pouch. 2 coins and a button. Better than feared. Your boots? Still there. One sports a fresh bite mark, but they're yours. A small but deeply personal victory. Fresh faces begin trickling in. Early risers. Travelers with deadlines. Laborers needing something to take the edge off before facing livestock, taxes, or worse, neighbors. The tavern slowly breathes back to life. Someone starts retelling a story from the night before. It's already transformed. Now there were 3 fights. The bard summoned a ghost. The stew was blessed by a saint. Everyone nods like it's holy truth. The night was chaos. The morning is grimy, slow, and filled with hangover-induced wisdom. And yet somehow you smile. Because you made it. You survived. You felt the heat, the noise, the sticky floor. You endured flying bread, questionable stew, thunderous laughter, and a man who tried to flirt with a candle. And now, something becomes undeniably clear. The tavern wasn't just a place to drink. It was the pulse of medieval life. In a world without screens or headlines, the tavern was the newsfeed, the town crier, the shared stage. A merchant from the coast could whisper rumors from far-off ports. A soldier might speak of battles no scroll ever recorded. A bard could spin tragedy into tune and sadness into solidarity, even if the chorus changed with every cup. It was where the village talked to itself. Farmers toasted beside smiths. Pilgrims shared tables with thieves. Strangers became friends, or at least drinking allies until the second round turned into a third. Social lines blurred. Deals were struck. Rivalries were born or resolved depending on how lucky the dice rolled. And it wasn't just stories or songs. Business happened here too. Contracts weren't signed. They were shaken on, over scratched wood and spilled ale. The tavern was part courtroom, part chapel, part stage. You could gain a job, lose your savings, fall in love, or start a vendetta. All in one unpredictable evening. But perhaps most importantly, the tavern gave you something else. It gave you a break, a breath, a few hours where the burden of life, cold winds, hard fields, harsh rules, could be softened by firelight and foolishness, where you could laugh at a bad joke, sing a worse song, and eat something that technically qualified as food, all while feeling something rare in the medieval world: lightness. Even if the stew was suspicious, the ale was warm, and the bed crawled. You were surrounded by voices, heat, stories. And in a time when war, plague, or winter might take you without notice, that kind of together meant everything. So when you walked into a medieval tavern, you weren't just ordering a drink. You were buying warmth, belonging, a story to carry out into the cold. And maybe, if luck and the tavern keeper allowed, a place to sleep where the fire hadn't quite gone out. Long before coffee houses, before polished pubs and neon bars, there was the tavern. Loud, dirty, honest, alive, and impossible to forget. Before she became the eternal face of ancient beauty, her profile carved into history with impossibly elegant cheekbones and an immortal gaze of poised serenity. Nefertiti was a mystery wrapped in sunlight. Her name means the beautiful one has come, but from where? No one truly knows. Some scholars whisper that she was the daughter of a high-ranking Egyptian official named Ai, perhaps even the sister of the man she would rule beside. Others claim she was a foreign princess, gifted in diplomacy, sent across borders as part of a royal alliance. Her beginnings are uncertain, her presence unforgettable. Nefertiti didn't enter the historical record gradually. She struck like lightning, sudden, dazzling, transformative. She didn't merely marry a pharaoh. She joined him as an equal in a reign that would tear down centuries of belief and rebuild Egypt's spiritual core from the sun up. Together with Akhenaten, she didn't just challenge the gods. She replaced them. The entire pantheon cast aside. In its place, a single divine force. Aten, the radiant sun disk. This wasn't reform. It was revolution. Heresy even. But Nefertiti didn't sit quietly on a gilded throne watching the world change around her. She led. She offered sacrifices. She presided over ceremonies. She appeared in temple carvings not as an ornament, but as a force. Sometimes, she's even shown smiting enemies, an image once reserved solely for kings and warriors. In art from that era, she appears more frequently than Akhenaten himself. And when she does, she isn't demure or diminished. She stands tall, powerful, almost mythic, wielding the very symbols of rule. In a civilization where the pharaoh was God on earth, her closeness to him, spiritually, politically, suggested something profound. She wasn't just a queen. She may have been a co-sovereign, but such radiance casts long shadows. Egypt was not ready. The priesthood, once bloated with wealth and influence, watched their temples close, their gods erased. The capital itself was uprooted, from Thebes to a new city carved from untouched desert. Akhetaten, now called Amarna, a city built for the sun, a city built from defiance. And through every upheaval, every radical shift, Nefertiti was there. Her name sung in solar hymns, her face etched in limestone, her hands raised to the dawn. But then, nothing. For all her brilliance in life, her death is a void. No confirmed burial, no tomb, no body, not even a clear record of her final days. As if history, after watching her burn so brightly, simply turned its head. And perhaps that is where her legend truly begins. But to understand Nefertiti's rise, we must first meet the man who broke the world to rebuild it, the heretic pharaoh, Akhenaten. He was not born that name. He entered life as Amenhotep IV, heir to 1,000 years of tradition. Gods, temples, rituals, unbroken. But something inside him fractured. Some say it was divine vision, others, madness. When he took the throne, he rejected the mighty god Ammonius and declared a new cosmic order. The only god worth worshipping was the Aten, the visible sun, giver of life. This wasn't just a spiritual pivot. It was an existential shockwave. Imagine a civilization, temples, hierarchies, entire cities, told that its gods were lies, that their prayers meant nothing, that their rituals had no purpose. Akhenaten didn't suggest change. He commanded it. He shut the doors of Ammonius temples. He erased the god's name from walls, statues, stelae. Cities were emptied, statues smashed, and in the vast stillness of the desert, a new city rose, Akhetaten, designed so the sun would rise between the cliffs and flood its streets with divine light. Through it all, Nefertiti was not a silent ornament. She was a partner, a mirror, a sun beside the sun. On temple walls, she appears worshipping Aten with the same devotion as Akhenaten. Their daughters stand beside them, faces lifted toward the radiance. These aren't just royal family scenes. They are holy iconography, a family lit by divine truth, written in sunbeams. Even the art began to shift. What once had been stiff, formal, and eternal became fluid, intimate, and almost human. Reliefs showed the royal couple not as distant deities, but as tender lovers, kissing, laughing, playing with their children beneath the golden arms of the Aten. Long fingers stretched toward soft cheeks. Robes flowed, emotion breathed in stone. And everywhere in this new aesthetic revolution was Nefertiti. She appeared not just beside Akhenaten, but sometimes above him, towering, central, commanding. In some inscriptions, her name is rendered as Nefertiti, a title that suggests she may have assumed a kingly role herself, co-regent, successor, It depends on which fragment of history you ask, and which one you're willing to believe. Did Akhenaten share power out of love, necessity, or clever political strategy? That's lost in the dust. But what remains is clear. Without Nefertiti, the Aten revolution may have fractured long before it burned out. But revolutions are fragile. Gods do not surrender quietly, and people, particularly in ancient Egypt, do not forget easily. They waited, murmuring behind closed temple doors, as sacred traditions were stripped away. By the peak of her influence, Nefertiti had become more than a queen. She was divine beauty given form, an icon of power, of presence. Egypt had seen mighty women before, Amos Nefertari, Hatshepsut, but Nefertiti's path was something different. She didn't take the throne through inheritance or war. She reshaped the very soul of the kingdom beside her husband, in daylight with ceremony and song. She gave Akhenaten 6 daughters, Meritaten, Meketaten, Ankhesenpeten, and others, their names echoing the sun in every syllable. They appear constantly in art, nestled in laps, tugging at beads, kissed by divine rays. But curiously, no sons were ever officially recorded. In a nation obsessed with lineage and male succession, this was more than curious, it was dangerous. Was it fate, chance, or was something else hidden in the quiet gaps between inscriptions? Some scholars suggest Akhenaten fathered sons with other women, or in whispers less polite, that Nefertiti herself may have played roles that modern historians are reluctant to name. Regardless, one truth burns through. Motherhood was central to her image. She is carved cradling her daughters in tender, living moments. These scenes are not the cold grandeur of power, but warm windows into love. A human queen, divine yet maternal, an impossible bridge between goddess and woman. And yet another image lingers, one far from soft. In several reliefs, Nefertiti wears the blue war crown, a royal symbol typically reserved for kings. She's depicted leading ceremonies, driving chariots, offering sacrifices, alone. She smites enemies with the precision and fury of a ruler, not a consort. These were not metaphors. These were official acts of sovereignty. It suggests a quiet but radical truth. Nefertiti was not preparing to rule with Akhenaten. She was preparing to rule after him. As Akhenaten's health declined, perhaps from a genetic disorder, perhaps from stress, Nefertiti appears to have stepped further into the spotlight of power. And then, she disappears. The records go dim. The light that had bathed her face in every temple mural fades without warning. No funeral texts, no grand burial, no farewell ode, just silence. Did she die unexpectedly? Was she removed from power? Or did she ascend to a new identity, veiled by politics, rewritten by successors who feared her influence? In one moment, she is everywhere. Sung in solar hymns, carved in temple walls, sharing rule with the most radical pharaoh Egypt had ever known. And then, like a flame snuffed out in desert wind, she is gone. Never before had a queen been so visually present, so omnipresent in public art. And yet, around the 12th year of Akhenaten's 17-year reign, something shifts. The images stop. Her name fades. The walls fall silent. History does not always record what matters. Sometimes it buries it on purpose. Then, just as suddenly as she rose, she vanished. Her name stops appearing. Her face, once everywhere, dissolves from murals and stelae. No tomb, no funerary texts, no mourning rites etched in stone. For a queen so central to Egypt's spiritual revolution, such a silent exit is more than odd. It's a rupture, a black hole in the middle of history. So what happened to Nefertiti? The most straightforward answer is also the most mortal. She died. Childbirth was a perilous passage, even for royalty. Her second daughter, Meketaten, disappears from the record around the same time. 2 absences, 2 silences, a mother and daughter possibly claimed in one tragic moment. But if that were true, where were the tributes, the mourning processions, the golden tomb fit for a living goddess? This woman had once stood equal to a pharaoh. A quiet death doesn't fit her script. Others suggest something darker, that perhaps the tides turned, that Nefertiti fell from favor in a court grown tense and unstable. Akhenaten, increasingly secluded in his desert capital, may have replaced her. Some point to a mysterious figure who appears briefly in the historical record. Smenkhare, co-regent, a shadow king. Was he a male heir, a younger half-brother, or, most electrifyingly, was Smenkhare Nefertiti herself, ruling in disguise? There are tantalizing hints. In the final years of Akhenaten's reign, a pharaoh named Nefertiti appears in inscriptions. This ruler uses female pronouns, speaks of Akhenaten as "my beloved husband," wields kingly power with a queenly hand. Could Nefertiti have donned the double crown and ruled outright? If so, she joined the rarest of ranks, a female king like Hatshepsut before her. But her solo reign, if it existed, was short. Nefertiti fades as abruptly as she arrived, and the stage shifts again. A new name rises, Tutankhaten, a boy king barely old enough to speak in court, let alone lead it. His name would change to Tutankhamen, and with it the kingdom would pivot again. The temples of Aten would be shuttered. The old gods would rise from the ashes. Amarna's sun would set. If Nefertiti had ruled, it was now over. If she had become Nefertiti or Smenkhare, her reign was erased, shattered like the statues of her husband. A ghost queen, visible only in fragments, misread inscriptions, broken cartouches, and statues with eyes gouged out. A puzzle with no centerpiece. And yet, her shadow lingers still. Because as Tutankhamen took the throne, questions arose. Who was guiding him? He was a child, 9 years old. Egypt was fractured, religiously exhausted, politically unstable. A boy can wear the crown, but he cannot rule alone. Someone was pulling the strings. His father was likely Akhenaten, but his mother? The records are maddeningly vague. Some say Nefertiti was merely a stepmother. Others argue she was the boy's true mother, citing artworks that seem to depict him during her final public appearances, standing small beside her in the solar courts. If Nefertiti birthed Tutankhamen, the continuity makes sense. His early reign was marked by careful restoration, of temples, of rituals, of national pride. The rebellion against Aten was swift, but politically elegant. As if someone who knew both worlds, the new and the old, was shaping the path. So who was it? Nefertiti, ruling from behind the curtain? The high priest Ai, her rumored father and the boy's future successor? Or both, quietly dismantling the very world they helped build? One piece of evidence lies buried in gold. In Tutankhamun's tomb, on a golden shrine, is a depiction of a woman anointing the young king. Her features are hauntingly familiar. High cheekbones, regal bearing, the unmistakable silhouette of her. If that woman is Nefertiti, it changes everything. It means she never left. Not truly. It means she may have remained in the heart of power, not as a queen on the throne, but as a ghost behind it. and yet no tomb, no mummy, no final resting place. For a woman who once ruled like a god, her ending is composed only of silence. No hieroglyph sings her final praises. No stone bears her last breath. Her name has been scrubbed from king lists, her image erased from temple walls. It's as if she was written in sand, then swept away by a vengeance wind. Still, her fingerprints remain. If she guided Tutankhamun as regent, as mother, as shadow queen, then her influence is everywhere. In the boy king's early edicts, in the strategic return to the old gods, in the very fact that order somehow was restored. But Nefertiti's name? Gone. And that absence, so loud, so glaring, has haunted Egyptologists for over a century. This was Egypt, a culture that built eternity into limestone, that embalmed bakers and barbers with as much care as generals, where even minor nobles had tombs filled with food, spells, and maps for the afterlife. And yet nothing for her. Why? Perhaps she died quietly in the final years of Amarna, a queen fading with the revolution she helped birth. Maybe her burial was rushed, her tomb hidden, her memory actively dismantled by the priests and kings who followed. After all, the backlash against Akhenaten's reforms was swift, and the erasure brutal. Names chiseled away, cities abandoned, the sun god buried with the sun itself. But there is another theory, one that still whispers through the sands of the Valley of the Kings. In 2015, radar scans of KV-62, the tomb of Tutankhamun, revealed curious anomalies. Hidden chambers, sealed walls. Could Nefertiti lie just meters away, behind untouched stone? A queen, hidden in plain sight, resting next to the boy she may have raised or ruled through. For a time, the world held its breath. But the scans proved inconclusive. Excavations stalled. Politics intervened. The tomb walls held their silence. And once again, Nefertiti slipped back into shadow. Yet her absence continues to speak. We may not have her tomb, but we have her face. Carved, painted, repeated across temples, walls, and shrines. And then there is one piece, one artifact that reignited her legend for the modern world. A bust, discovered in 1912, painted limestone, delicate, regal, unfinished, but eternal. She gazes forward with timeless poise, her cheekbones sharp, her features impossibly balanced, the tall blue crown framing her head like a halo, one eye complete, the other left bare. Perhaps an artistic choice, perhaps an accident, perhaps something we were never meant to understand. She was found by German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt in the ruins of a sculptor's studio in Amarna. When he uncovered her face, he could barely write the words. In his journal, he simply noted, "No use describing it. You have to see it." And the world did. Since then, that single bust has stood beneath museum lights in Berlin's Neues Museum, not just as a portrait, but as a monument. To mystery, to power, to beauty so profound it slipped through the grasp of history and survived anyway. And yet, even her bust is controversial. Germany acquired it during a time of vague antiquities laws and quiet diplomacy. For decades, Egypt has demanded its return. To many Egyptians, she belongs not in glass behind velvet ropes, but in the soil that once bore her steps, beneath the sun whose rays she once lifted her hands to. She is theirs, a queen whose skin once burned in the Aten's fire, whose name, even in absence, refuses to die, because history tried to forget Nefertiti, but the world never could. She is not just a queen, she is a question, a legend, presence, and somewhere, Beneath stone or dust or forgotten script, she is still waiting. But Germany has said no. They argue that the bust is too delicate to risk travel. That movement could damage what time has spared. Others whisper a harsher truth, that it's not about preservation, but possession. Nefertiti draws crowds. She is their Mona Lisa, their sun queen in stone. And yet, wherever she stands, behind museum glass or in buried memory, she has already reshaped how we see ancient women. Nefertiti was never just a beautiful face. The bust may be silent, but it stares back at us with the authority of someone who ruled. Her eyes, though one remains unfinished, convey poise, command, a challenge. She doesn't merely gaze. She assesses. You see it and you understand. This was a woman who held secrets, made decisions, shifted the axis of empires, and she did. It is extraordinary that one sculpture, fragile, damaged, unblinking, could resurrect someone lost to time. We may never find her tomb. We may never learn how she died. But through this face, carved 3,000 years ago, Nefertiti achieved the one thing every ancient pharaoh dreamed of: immortality, not through gold, not through pyramids, through presence. The stone is still, but the story it tells roars louder with every century. Nefertiti's story lives in a space between fact and myth, between what we know and what we long to believe. Few figures from the ancient world have been so visible and yet so unknown. She is a paradox, one of the most depicted women of her era, and still a riddle. Across the centuries, she's been imagined in many forms. To some, a goddess in flesh, divine beauty given breath. To others, a strategist, the mind behind the throne, perhaps even the hand upon it. Some see her as tragic, a radiant figure swallowed by the tide of a failed revolution. Others as calculating, navigating the unraveling world around her with precise, elegant control. What do we know? We know she was not just a wife, not just a queen. She was present visually, spiritually, politically, in ways few royal women ever were. Her image rivals kings. Her roles in sacred rituals, state ceremonies, even battle scenes, show a woman not near power, but within it. In a world ruled by men, she didn't rebel. She didn't conquer. She simply arrived and took her place. We know she stood at the heart of one of the most daring religious upheavals in Egyptian history. Akhenaten may have preached Aten's light, but Nefertiti embodied it. She was the radiant bridge between sun and skin, between gods above and people below. She didn't just serve the divine. She became it, and then she vanished. Her name erased, her image destroyed, her legacy buried intentionally. And still, we remember, because myths survive where facts fail. Because when a woman becomes both icon and enigma, she leaves the reach of time. Nefertiti was never meant to be simple or understood. She was meant to be seen. And maybe that was her final, secret power, not to be explained, but to endure. To be remembered not as a relic in a tomb, but as a queen of endless speculation. It has been over 3,000 years since she last walked beneath Egypt's sky. Yet her shadow stretches across continents, whispered in lecture halls, reflected in museum glass, reimagined in novels, films, dreams. She hasn't faded. She's grown. Because in the end, it isn't just the beauty. We've seen beauty before. It's the silence that draws us in. The gaps, the missing chapters, the unfinished eye, the sense that she's still here, just beyond our reach, daring us to look closer, knowing we'll never quite find her. In that mystery, Nefertiti became something greater than history. She became archetype. Every generation casts Nefertiti in a new light. In the early 1900s, she was imagined as an exotic beauty, silent, veiled in mystery. In the feminist movements of the 20th century, she rose again, not as an ornament, but as a symbol of female strength, a ruler nearly lost beneath the weight of patriarchal erasure. Today, she is all things at once: a style icon, a political player, a possible pharaoh, an African queen with a gaze that still challenges centuries. She has lived 1,000-second lives, not through evidence, but through imagination. And maybe that's the most fitting immortality of all. In ancient Egypt, to live forever was not just to be embalmed. It was to be remembered. If your name was spoken, your image seen, your story retold, your soul could cross into eternity. You could walk the field of reeds. You could dine with the gods. You could be alive beyond death. By that measure, Nefertiti succeeded beyond every prophecy. Her name is whispered in museums. Her face is etched in memory. Her story, fractured, debated, but burning with intrigue, still commands the world's attention. Perhaps her greatest monument is not a hidden tomb. It is this, the mystery itself, perfectly incomplete legacy, a woman half glimpsed, half erased, and entirely unforgettable. That may have been her final act of power, not to conquer land, not to build temples, but to bend time itself, to become timeless. Nefertiti, the beautiful one, has come, never truly left. She lingers in our questions, our wonder, and our refusal to forget the women history tried to erase. She lives not in gold, but in the act of being searched for. And what truly is more eternal than that? Far away, in China, where mist clings low and the wind hums softly through bamboo groves, a dragon lies asleep, but not the kind told in fire and thunder. This one is carved from earth and patience. The dragon's backbone, the Longji rice terraces, its scales woven from soil and water, reflecting light like ancient breath. From a distance, the hills ripple in waves, an enormous creature resting on a mountainside. But come closer, you'll hear it breathe. Water trickles through channels dug by calloused hands. Seedlings flutter like whispers. Morning mist rises gently from the land, coiling upward like the dragon exhaling at dawn. This was not built in a year, or a decade, or even a lifetime. Over 700 years ago, the Zhuang and Yao people stood before the mountain and asked the most human of questions. How do we live here? With no machines, only stone tools and bamboo baskets, they answered, inch by inch, step by step. They carved the slopes, not to conquer them, but to learn from them. They turned gravity into a guide, rain into resource, land into life, and in doing so, they shaped a creature of earth and resilience. The dragon became their partner, and the mountain, once rigid, began to breathe with its people. No part of the land was wasted. No part was broken. Every curve was made with care, every level with reverence. Today, the terraces still feed villages, but more than that, they feed memory. They remind us what can be built when time is honored, not outrun. When we shape instead of seize. When we listen instead of force. To walk among the dragon's backbone is to move through a landscape etched by endurance. A testament to what happens when human hands and earth grow together, layer by layer, dream by dream. Just as Nefertiti shaped memory with silence, here, too, the dragon teaches without words. Not every legacy is loud. Some are carved, some are whispered, Some, like hers and like the mountain, are simply endless. There is no illusion here. No machinery hums in the distance. No survey flags pierce the earth. What stretches across these mountains are not designs imposed by force, but fingerprints. The fingerprints of patience, persistence, and the quiet genius of human endurance. Every line, every slope, every ripple of water, shaped by hands that understood the heartbeat of the land. Centuries ago, when the Zhuang and Yao peoples first laid eyes on these steep, unforgiving hillsides, they did not curse the incline. They saw potential. The flatlands were claimed, the fertile valleys already spoken for. But here, in the bones of the mountain, there was room for something extraordinary. If only they could make the earth listen. And so, with no iron, no steel, only wooden shovels, stone hoes, baskets carried on shoulders bent with generations, they began. Terraces emerged, slowly, carefully, built not by force, but by calculation and respect. Each one held in place by hand-stacked stones, balanced not by blueprint, but by instinct. Because here, precision is everything. Too steep and the water rushes wild. Too level and it stagnates. There were no rulers, no levels, only the wisdom of watching, of learning from rain, from slope, from failure. Children learned from their elders. Elders watched the mountain, and in time the mountain yielded not from defeat, but from trust. What rose was a new landscape, one that flows with nature, not against it. From the valley's cradle to the sky's edge, these terraces curl like the coils of a sleeping dragon, a staircase of green and gold, as if the earth itself had been sculpted by breath. They look as though the mountain dreamed them, but it wasn't the mountain. It was people. No engines, no concrete, no engineers, just human hands, human time, and the belief that even the harshest terrain can become a cradle for life. Today they still function, still feed, still endure. No bulldozers, no shortcuts. The old ways remain, not out of resistance to progress, but because they work. They hold. Because when tradition is woven deep enough, it outlasts every storm. If the dragon's body is soil and stone, then water is its soul. It flows not with noise or pressure, but with silent authority. There are no pumps, no pipes, no wires, only a choreography so fluid, so precise, it feels sacred. At the mountain's crest, rain and springs gather into narrow ditches, channeled through earth and time. Gravity becomes the farmer's unseen ally. The water slides down, one terrace to the next, pausing, feeding, moving on. There are no levers, no gauges, just hand-carved gates, opened and closed by memory, by feel. And so, every day, villagers walk the narrow ridges like musicians tuning a living instrument. One leak and a dozen levels suffer. One overflow and the system unravels. This is not just farming. It is listening. In spring, the terraces are flooded. They become mirrors, perfect sheets of water that reflect clouds, the sun, even stars. At dawn, the mountain becomes a canvas, painting heaven onto earth. Then summer thickens the water with green. Rice plants rise, waving in the wind like an emerald tide. Autumn gilds it all in gold, ripened grain glistening in soft light. And winter stills the dragon. The waters freeze. The terraces sleep beneath frost and snow. But the channels remain empty veins waiting. Here, time doesn't move in hours. It flows in moisture. It arrives with thaw, with the song of frogs, with the first whisper of wet soil. In a world of seconds and screens, Longji still tells time by seasons and silence. This dragon doesn't roar. It ripples, not fire but water, not destruction but patience, not legend but living proof of what humans can build when they listen instead of command. And here, spring begins not with blossoms, but with water. As the last snows recede from the mountaintops, thin silver threads of meltwater begin their descent. They wind softly down the slopes, seeking the waiting terraces below. The fields are ready, still, glimmering. The dragon stirs, and with it so do the people. There are no horns, no headlines, only footsteps and mist. Farmers, young and old, rise with the mountain's breath. Barefoot, with straw hats shading their eyes, they walk the ridgelines as their ancestors did, baskets slung over their shoulders, filled with life waiting to be planted. The air smells of soaked earth and pine wind. The paddies, flooded days earlier, now gleam like jade mirrors catching the morning sky. There are no machines. There never were. Each rice seedling, grown tender in nursery beds, is placed into the water by hand. One at a time, row by row, step by step, the farmers wade into the chill. Their hands press the roots into the soft mud with the care of those planting more than food, planting memory. Bent backs, reaching arms, silent focus, all day, all week. Children follow them, splashing in the shallows. They learn the spacing not from rulers, but from rhythm. They learn the craft not in classrooms, but through contact with water, with mud, with lineage. Knowledge here is inherited through touch. Planting is not just a task. It is a rite. In some villages, the elders scatter the first handful of seedlings like blessings. Songs drift over the water. Offerings are laid for the mountain spirits. Every field planted is not just a promise of harvest. It is a covenant. With land, with ancestry, with tomorrow. There is no rush, no clock to beat, no yield to maximize. No one hurries the dragon. The pace is meditative, almost sacred, a choreography of breath, soil, and human will. And then the miracle begins. From water, green shoots rise, slender, soft, and defiant. They shimmer like whispers, like hope made visible. And just like that, the mountain begins to grow again. Not just rice, but resilience. Each stalk is a prayer. Each row a refusal to forget, to give up, to hurry. This is how the future is planted, with mud on the hands and eyes on the sky. The dragon is awake. The mountain exhales, and time flows forward again. Scattered along these terraced veins, between curves of rice and ribbons of sky, lie the dragon's heartbeats. Villages like Pingin, Dazai, Jinking. They are not just homes. They are echoes, living, breathing repositories of memory. They cling to the mountainsides with timber bones and spirit breath, stilted above the soil as if resting mid-step on the dragon's spine. The rooftops are dark and slanted, mirroring the terraces they face. From above, they appear like wooden lanterns drifting across waves of green. Inside, life remains simple and rich. Generations share space. Stories are seasoned into meals cooked over crackling wood. The scent of bamboo smoke and rice wine floats gently into the dawn. The people here, Zhuang and Red Yao, carry their culture not as performance, but as breath. You'll recognize the Red Yao women instantly. Their hair, never cut since childhood, coils atop their heads like inked crowns. Sometimes, when they bathe in the river, it unfurls in black cascades, falling like silk waterfalls, graceful enough to be mistaken for myth. Though power lines crawl toward the villages and phone screens glow at night, tradition holds its line. Fabrics still dyed with indigo, clothing still woven on handlooms, music still played on reed flutes and bronze drums, weddings still danced, harvests still sung. Hospitality is not ritual, it is instinct. Guests are welcomed not with spectacle, but with presence. A cup of tea from wild leaves, a gourd of rice wine, a story from a grandmother whose memory predates electricity. Here, modernity is not resisted, it is filtered, allowed only where it does not drown the old rhythm. Because these villages do not just exist on a mountain, they belong to it, and the mountain, in return, remembers their names. They still speak of dragons in the mist, of ancestors who first carved the slopes with their bare hands, of mountain spirits who guard the terraces, watching silently from the groves. And though the world has arrived with cameras, crowds, and concrete ambitions, the rhythm of the mountain remains unchanged, like a drum beating beneath the noise. Rice still grows, rituals still mark the changing seasons. The dragon still breathes, not in resistance to change, but in the slow, graceful act of absorbing it. Here, within its winding spine, life does not hurry. It flows, it echoes, it remembers. To walk the terraces of Longji is to step through layered myth, not imagined, but inhabited. These hills are not just clay and stone. They are memory, they are song, they are sacred. To the villagers, the mountain is not terrain. It is a living being, a spirit wrapped in curves, a sacred creature shaped by gods and handed down through generations like a whispered story. The most enduring legend speaks of a dragon, sleeping beneath the ridges, its body coiled into the land, the spine, the terraces, its breath, the mist. Locals believe that when fog rolls in and the paddies disappear into cloud, the dragon stirs gently, exhaling across the valley. Another tale tells of a time when famine gripped the hills. The people climbed and prayed, empty-handed and desperate. The gods, moved by devotion, sent rain and guidance. Carve the hills into steps, they said, and the rice will follow. The people obeyed, and the dragon appeared not as myth but as mentor. Since then, the villagers have honored the mountain like family. They do not shout in the fields. They do not cut trees without a blessing. These aren't laws. They are inherited instincts. They aren't written down. They are sung. You'll hear them in the planting songs, in the incense smoke that curls skyward at season's start, in the hush that descends on foggy mornings. A reverence more powerful than scripture. Children grow up with these tales not as fantasy, but as foundation. To mock the dragon is to risk ruin. To forget the spirits is to invite silence where song should be. Even today, before the first water is released each spring, some farmers still pour rice wine into the soil and whisper a quiet thanks. No audience, no spectacle, only tradition as natural as breath. And whether you believe in dragons or not, something ancient pulses here. In the silence, in the shimmer, in the quiet conviction that this place is more than human hands could ever fully claim. It is not built, it is told, written not in ink, but in water and stone, in green and sky. For centuries, this dragon's spine was a secret, curled within the hills, protected by remoteness, known only to those born beneath its breath. But no place stays hidden forever. The road came, then the wires. Tourists climbed the paths where farmers once walked alone, and the terraces, weathered by wind but untouched by spectacle, faced a question they had never asked before. How do you survive being seen? There was fear that the mountain would be sold slope by slope, that wood would give way to glass, that heritage would be traded for novelty. But the people of Longji didn't retreat. They didn't resist. They wove. They opened their homes not as hotels but as hearths. Guests are welcomed not with brochures, but with bowls of wild greens picked that morning. Sticky rice steamed in hollowed bamboo. Stories shared around fire, not flash. They sleep in stilted wooden homes where the wind still speaks through slats, and roosters still mark the morning. The experience isn't crafted. It lives. Here, life isn't reenacted. It's lived. Each season, the farmers still come. They flood the terraces by hand, plant each shoot with care, harvest each grain with blades worn smooth by generations. Children attend school by day, but when the light begins to bend, they return to the fields, not out of obligation, but out of rhythm. Tourism may bring income, but rice brings life. One sustains, the other roots. Though many of the young have ventured into the cities, many also return. Not for nostalgia, but for something deeper. For the sound of water gliding through channels. For the way stars reflect in still paddies. For the way mountains teach you to wait. Yes, festivals are louder now. Loudspeakers hum where once there were only drums. Signs in Mandarin and English mark the springs once known only by story. And yet the rituals remain. Offerings are still made. Songs still begin in the elder's breath. Nothing has been erased, only absorbed gently, layer by layer, like water stepping from terrace to terrace. The terraces endure not by freezing time, but by breathing with it. They flex, they shift, but they never break. In a world that often abandons tradition in the name of speed, Longji stands like a whisper reminding us that progress can move softly, if we let it. Because the dragon's backbone is never the same place twice. It sheds its skin with the seasons, not by destruction, but by transformation. Cities evolve over decades, but these terraces change by the week, painted not in concrete, but in rhythm. To stand here through a full year is to watch a mountain breathe. Spring arrives like a mirror. The fields flood. The sky lays itself at your feet. Mist and cloud drift below your step. The rice is not yet visible, but life stirs just beneath the surface. Visitors say it feels like walking through heaven. Summer follows, unfolding 1,000 shades of green. Shoots rise in perfect rows, and from afar, the hills ripple like woven silk. Frogs call. Farmers wade in knee-deep water, their straw hats bobbing like small boats across a jade sea. Then comes autumn and gold. The terraces glow with ripe grain. Wind rushes through the stalks like a song. Drums echo in the valleys. Families gather. Sticky rice steams in bamboo. The dragon is fully awake and generous. Winter softens everything. The fields fall silent. Sometimes snow dusts the steps. Other times, frost clings like lace. Tools are stored. Voices are hushed. The dragon rests. Each season tells a new story. Spring reflects. Summer grows. Autumn feeds. Winter listens. The beauty of Longji lies not just in its shape, but in its cycle. Photographers chase the light here. They wait for a perfect moment. But the terraces do not pose. They do not freeze. They move. They breathe. And in their slow motion, they teach us beauty is not a single instant. It is a rhythm, a return, promise kept quietly. And so the dragon turns again, not with fire, but with water, grain, and wind. In the end, these terraces are more than fields. They are a vow, promise carved in curves, whispered in water, handed down like a prayer from one generation to the next. The dragon's backbone isn't just a marvel of farming or engineering. It is a story of what happens when humans choose not to dominate the land, but to live with it. There were easier paths. The ancestors of Longji could have left, could have followed the rivers down into gentler places. But they stayed. They studied the slope, listened to the stones, followed the water, and in doing so, they made the impossible ordinary. They fed villages on the side of a mountain. Every curve holds a lesson, not just about rice, but about patience, about legacy, about care, because these terraces were not built in years, or even in lifetimes. They were built in centuries. There is no shortcut to harmony, no machine that can replicate wisdom whispered through time. And yet nothing here is stagnant. The terraces live. They adjust. They reflect. They grow. And with every season, with every quiet act of planting, they tell us the same thing. That balance is not a moment. It is a practice. That beauty is not still. It is alive. And that dragons, it turns out, don't need fire. Only faith. They came with bold titles and darker questions. Documentaries whispered of lost epochs. Books argued for civilizations drowned by time. A new wave of voices began to sketch a different map of our past. One not drawn in academic ink, but in myth, erosion, and the inconvenient geometry of submerged stone. They said, this was not erosion. They said, this was memory petrified. And the underwater sphinx, half lion, half ghost, became more than a curiosity. It became a crack in the timeline, a fracture in the grand narrative. What if history wasn't wrong, just incomplete? What if the sands didn't bury the truth, but preserved it, waiting for eyes willing to look without instruction? To the establishment, these claims were heresy. To the curious, they were fuel. For decades, the debate simmered between those who demand evidence and those who feel its absence is the very evidence of something hidden, something deliberately left out. And still the so-called Sphinx lies beneath its silted veil. It is not fenced. It is not ticketed. It is not featured in museum catalogs or tourist maps. It simply is. Silent. Watching. They say that when the Nile lowers during the driest years, the shape becomes clearer. Grooves reemerge, arcs appear, like ribs surfacing beneath breath. And always it stirs something primal in those who see it. Not fear, but the sense of standing too close to a truth you weren't meant to find. A truth that does not shout. A truth that waits. And perhaps that is what connects this silent figure beneath the Nile to the terraces of Longji curled among the misted mountains. Both are testaments. Both are whispers. Both are patient beyond comprehension. One shaped by hands in reverence of the land. The other possibly shaped in a world before memory, before language, before us. And both remain outside the noise. Because the oldest things in this world do not demand attention. They simply exist, bending with weather, absorbing time, and speaking in ways we've nearly forgotten how to hear. That the Sphinx, or perhaps a sphinx, was no mere monument of kingship, but a memory in stone, carved by hands not recorded in any scroll, from a time no dynasty dares to claim. Atlantis, some whispered, pre-dynastic Egypt, others proposed, but all agreed it pointed to something older, something lost not to time but to water. They spoke of floods, not metaphorical but literal, that swept across a green Sahara, drowning cities before they could inscribe their names. They pointed to the great Sphinx's own enclosure, carved not with the claw of wind, but the tears of ancient rain. Dr. Robert Schoch in the 1990s dared to say it aloud, "This weathering is not desert-born." Spoke of heavy, sustained rainfall, rain that last touched the Giza Plateau over 9,000 years ago, long before Khafra, long before the dynasties, long before Egypt was even a word. And if the Great Sphinx is that old, if it truly predates dynastic Egypt, then what of the underwater Sphinx, sleeping farther down, where the Nile once raged and receded? Some satellite images show suspicious shapes, right angles where none should be, patterns beneath the silt that suggest deliberate foundation, grooves not carved by chaos, but by design. What if, hidden beneath that mud, lies a sibling monument, one older, one erased, one the ancients themselves forgot? Skeptics say it's fantasy, wishful erosion, pareidolia, but then they said the same about Göbekli Tepe. And yet, there it stands, megalithic, aligned, carved by hunter-gatherers in 9600 BCE, before pottery, before writing, before war. Stone that speaks from a time when no one should have been building anything. So why not here? Why not Egypt? Why not a pre-dynastic people, oral, nomadic, instinctive, shaping the Nile Valley long before Narmer drew his palette? If this so-called underwater Sphinx is real, it doesn't just rewrite Egypt. It rewrites us. It opens the door to a forgotten chapter, a time between ice and empire, when the Nile was wild and the Sahara still sang with rain, when stories were carried not on scrolls, but in song, in stone, in shape. And then came silence. Around Abu Roash, the stone still speaks. It whispers through sediment. It hums in curves worn smooth not by desert air, but by persistent water. Grooves where fingers once traced a lion's flank. Channels where floods once flowed. Geologists who've reviewed photographs of the site see something unnerving. Not chaos, but memory. Because stone, after all, does not forget. It records. It endures. It waits. And here, buried beneath centuries of indifference and drought, it tells a story not yet written, not yet taught, not yet allowed, but there, waiting, not by wind, not by sand, but by something far older, rainfall relentless and prehistoric, long vanished from this desert land. The same arguments once whispered about the Great Sphinx now echo beneath the Nile, especially around its enclosure wall, where deep vertical fissures climb the trench like ancient scars. Not marks of desert wind, but of waterfall, of weather, of a climate lost. And now, just beyond the accepted maps, near that forgotten floodplain, we see the same marks, this time buried in silt, half submerged in memory. During periods of low Nile flow, locals say it stirs. Curved stone shoulders, a hunched form, a base too symmetrical to be accident, too deliberate to dismiss. Some researchers have surveyed the basin and found it geologically alive. High clay content, ancient flood scars, layers that tell of water rising fast, falling slow, shifting directions with the centuries. But it's not the chaos of erosion that startles them. It's the alignment. The flow follows the form. The grooves arc with the sculpture, not against it, as if the monument knew the water would come, as if it was carved for a flood and buried by the very force that once gave it meaning. The sediments around the site date back to the early Holocene, a time when Egypt was not desert, but savanna, a time of thunderclouds, forests, and ferocious rivers. If a statue stood then, it could have remained visible for generations. until the Nile swallowed it whole, until memory dried up with the land. Skeptics say coincidence, but water does not sculpt faces. It does not place foundations. It does not mimic geometry we've seen before, just a few miles to the south. So the question deepens. If water could hide a monument like this, what else has it erased? How much of human history lies beneath still water? And if the underwater Sphinx does exist, carved, silent, real, why has no one dug it up? Why does it remain buried? The answers are not found in stone. They're found in silence. Egypt's archaeological institutions protect their heritage like a pharaoh guards his tomb. They are methodical, cautious, and unyielding. No excavation can begin without the full weight of official sanction. And no site is touched unless its story has already been agreed upon. This, after all, is not just archaeology. It is identity. And in Egypt, identity is carved in timeline. To dig here, to expose something that challenges the fourth dynasty, the foundational myth, is to strike at the heart of national memory. And that memory, they say, must be flawless. And so, the underwater Sphinx waits, unexcavated, unclaimed, unspoken. Independent researchers come and go, some with sonar, some with sketches, some with stories they can never quite prove. But without the stamp of institutional blessing, their findings float, suggestive but illegitimate. Even if it is truth, it is not recognized truth. Then there is the river itself. The Nile does not stay still. It floods, it drifts. It wraps itself around history and carries it away. The site in question is flood-prone, submerged for half the year. To excavate it would mean draining an entire basin, rerouting water, stabilizing centuries of buried pressure, without collapsing the very structure you're trying to save. And that's just the engineering. The real challenge? What happens after the truth is uncovered? Because a find like this wouldn't just shift academic theory. It would detonate it. It would redraw timelines, reopen closed debates, invite chaos, not just from scholars, but from the world, media storms, cultural reckonings, political upheaval. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities is not blind to this, but it chooses its revelations carefully, prefers monuments that affirm, not ones that question everything. Some say the silence is innocent. Others say it is engineered, that somewhere behind closed doors the surveys have already been run, the data already stored, the significance already understood and shelved. But there are no press releases, no excavation permits, no museum display with a caption that reads, "Here lies the beginning of doubt." So the Sphinx remains where it has always been, beneath silence. Whether by erosion or intention, it sleeps, beneath reeds and silt, beneath academia and state, beneath 1,000 unasked questions. And it is the deepest kind of irony that in the land most devoted to preserving its ancient past, one of its most profound relics may be lying unclaimed, untouched not by time, but by the very systems meant to protect it. But nothing stays buried forever. To the ancient Egyptians, a sphinx was not mere stone. It was symbol. It was threshold. It was the meeting of sky and ground. Part lion, raw strength. Part man, reason, vision, divine order. It was power guided by wisdom. Instinct made eternal. A god, a riddle, a warning. And the most famous of them all, the Great Sphinx of Giza, sits like a dream cast in limestone, 66 feet high, watching the sun rise and fall for over 4,000 years. But its face, like its origin, remains debated. Was it Khafra's image, or a face older than dynasties, perhaps recarved, perhaps replaced? And now, a second, hidden, worn by water, possibly older. No inscriptions mention too. No hieroglyph sings of symmetry, but Egyptian sacred spaces are defined by mirroring. Temples flanked by twin pylons, avenues lined with lions in pairs, obelisks rising like bookends to the sky. Why not twin sphinxes? Why not a guardian pair, one still watching the sunrise and one watching the forgotten? Some propose that this so-called underwater sphinx is not a copy but the source, a prototype shaped by a people we no longer name, a civilization unrecorded, unremembered, but not uninspired. If it was carved before writing, it belonged to a time outside dynasties, before pharaohs, before gods had crowns. Its purpose, then, would not be propaganda. It would be cosmic, aligned, ritual, remembering, not to glorify a king, but to mark a flood, an epoch, a star, a silence. The lion form is no accident. In ancient Egypt, the lion was the horizon, the gate of day and night, a beast that stood at the edge of light, guarding the world from forgetting. To carve a lion facing east was to make the sun eternal. Now imagine one carved not in known history, but in its absence. Before papyrus, before pyramids, before the Nile had chosen its bed. Such a monument would not just rewrite Egypt, it would reposition it, not as the origin of human grandeur, but as the echo of something older, deeper, a guardian of what used to be. And if that lion sleeps beneath water, isn't it only fitting? For what better symbol for a lost world than a watcher drowned by time? And so the whispers grow louder, and a divide opens, not of sand, but of story. Not between believers and skeptics, but between those who say, "This can't be," and those who whisper, "What if it already was?" On one side of this widening fault line stands traditional Egyptology, meticulous, deliberate, grounded in consensus. It values stratigraphy, inscriptions, peer-reviewed journals, and calibrated carbon dates. Its caution is not baseless. In a land where nature often mimics intention, a misstep can rewrite fiction into curriculum. Archaeology, they say, is not speculation. It is stewardship. The past is brittle. Once broken under false claims or sensational headlines, it cannot be remade. But others argue, caution has become a cage. On the other side stands a growing and diverse chorus of independent voices: engineers, geologists, satellite analysts, scholars from beyond the orthodox, who believe that something extraordinary may be hiding beneath the mud near Giza, and we are looking away on purpose. They do not swing blindly. They bring high-resolution satellite data showing symmetry where nature prefers chaos. LiDAR scans suggest rectangular platforms, edges too clean to be accidental. They highlight erosion patterns that curve with the form, flowing not randomly, but along a design. And they ask, why won't we look deeper? They don't blame the scientists. They blame the system. Egypt's historical identity is more than academic. It is cultural sovereignty, and it runs on tourism. A new sphinx, especially one that challenges the official timeline, doesn't just threaten chronology. It threatens control. The story of Egypt is more than history. It is heritage, curated and guarded. And what if that story has a forgotten prelude? What if the myth of origins isn't just incomplete, but off by millennia? The fear, they say, isn't hoax. The fear is disruption. And so, the so-called underwater sphinx has become more than a buried form. It is now a symbol, a totem for the war over history itself. It appears in documentaries, podcasts, late-night debates, and symposiums. Supporters wear it like a banner. Detractors wield it like a warning. But the deeper truth lies somewhere between layers, not of mud and sediment, but of certainty and silence. This is not just a debate about stone. It is a mirror. It reflects our very relationship with the past. Do we only follow the lines already drawn? Or do we chase the faint shapes that shimmer just beyond consensus? The underwater sphinx isn't just a structure. It's a threshold, a test of how curious we are allowed to be. And until the day someone pulls back the mud, it will remain both mute and monumental. A mystery buried in plain sight. There's something uniquely haunting about a question that looks up at us through time, wearing the body of a lion and the stillness of forgotten memory. The so-called Sphinx beneath Giza's basin may or may not be real, but it moves something in us. Not the thrill of discovery, something deeper, a quiet ache, a longing not to learn, but to remember, because the idea of a monument lost to water, half swallowed by time, does not just challenge archaeology. It stirs something older, the human memory of loss. We have always lived beside ruins. We walk among the bones of cities. We build over broken gods. We map the earth with the wreckage of those who came before. Languages die, walls fall, myths fracture, and somewhere in the hollow between epochs, we reach backward not to find an artifact, but a sense of who we were. How deep do our stories run? How much have we buried? How many names have we forgotten in our sprint toward light? If this lion beneath the Nile was truly carved before writing, before dynasties, before Egypt, then it is not just a relic. It is a voice, from a chapter we didn't know we tore out. A monument that may mark a people who studied the stars not with telescopes, but with ritual, who honored the land not as property, but as partner, who carried myths not in ink, but in stone. Some call that fantasy, others call it memory in disguise. But whether the story is carved in truth or just sediment, its gravity remains. Because to imagine a monument hewn in a forgotten age, older than the pyramids, lost to flood, and erased without record, is to face a brutal truth. That civilization is not permanent. That time is not a staircase, but a tide. That even stone can vanish if the river remembers how to rise. And maybe that's why this story refuses to dissolve. It haunts not with fear, but with reverence. Because it tells us something we are not often told. That the age of discovery is not over. That mystery is not extinct. That the earth still holds secrets no screen has mapped. In a world saturated with answers, the underwater sphinx is that rarest of things. An unanswered question. A gap in the known, pause in the pattern, a breath before the next verse. And whether it proves to be nothing more than eroded limestone, or the remnants of a civilization swallowed by flood and forgetting, its value remains untouched, because it makes us wonder, what if the past is deeper than we've dared to measure? What if myth is not imagination, but compressed memory? What if beneath the known lies the unspoken, not erased, but waiting? The underwater sphinx of Giza, whether lion or illusion, remains precisely where it always was, beneath the surface, beneath the silt, beneath the weight of belief and disbelief. It has no marker, no name, no crowd, and yet, in that very absence, it speaks. In the hush between certainties, it reminds us. For every monument we've mapped, there are others still hidden, still shrouded in dust, still dismissed as noise or shadow or chance. Some are too delicate to ever touch. Others are sealed under rivers. And a few, like this one, are visible yet unseen. Not because they lack meaning, but because they ask questions we're not yet ready to answer. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes this one so powerful. Not its size, not its age, but its silence. It doesn't instruct. It doesn't explain. It just waits. And in doing so, it reveals the edge of what we know. Because the underwater sphinx might never be excavated. Politics are slower than shovels. Tradition heavier than stone. Permits harder to crack than granite. But that doesn't make it irrelevant. In fact, it may be its greatest truth. That something ignored, avoided, unclaimed can still transform what we see. Because the sphinx beneath the Nile is no longer just an object. It is a mirror, reflecting not just what lies buried in mud, but what we bury in ourselves. Our limits, our questions, our forgotten need to remember. It reminds us that history isn't a closed book, but a mosaic, shattered, scattered, waiting for curiosity to piece it back together. It teaches that not all puzzles need solving to have meaning, that some monuments serve their highest purpose simply by surviving obscurity. Perhaps one day, the Nile will fall back and reveal the full form. Perhaps science will confirm what whispers have long believed. Or perhaps it will remain myth, passed like a torch from one dreamer to the next. But even as shadow, it has already done what few discoveries ever do. It has moved us, and in a world drowning in certainty, that may be its most sacred gift. Because maybe the most ancient things aren't just buried in time, but buried in us, in our longing to explore, in our refusal to forget, in our wild, impossible belief that somewhere just beneath the surface, the past still breathes and still waits to be found.